everyone. It's been a crazy busy couple months, but we're really looking forward to getting this next episode out into the world and into your ears. Before we introduce our guests, though, we wanted to take a quick minute to make sure you didn't miss our latest feature announcement. It's called Inspect. Combined with 2 new route filters, along with the trusty heat maps, we feel it's the most powerful way to discover new routes. From the Explore page in the mobile app, all you have to do is long press anywhere on the map and Inspect will give you the best routes that pass through that precise point. It's easy, it's awesome, and it gives you exactly the ride you're looking for and exactly the place you want it. Like we said, we're pretty excited about it all and know that Inspect will definitely make finding new, quality routes tailored to your riding style easier than ever, which, as it turns out, is kind of our thing. All right, moving on. Episode 8 of Ride Buddies is here.
Hey, great to see you.
Action. Great to see you. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Last time we crossed paths. Tucson, Arizona. Let's see. Was that January?
That was January, I think, or maybe early Feb, but...
Okay. So in that time, where have you been?
Right after we saw you, Margaret and I got in the car, drove back east, stopped in Bentonville.
Nice. First time?
Not my first time in Bentonville, but it was a good... It was like a good way station in between coming back home and having spent those weeks in Arizona. Yeah. And so spent a week in Bentonville. I rode bikes, went to the museum, saw friends there. Margaret was able to work remotely from Bentonville. And then the next weekend we finished the drive back to Vermont. Yeah. And then we were here for like a week before getting on a plane, going to Italy, where we were for 3 weeks, kind of holiday, riding bikes, working remotely down in Puglia.
Yep.
And then Margaret had to go home, and I stayed on in Europe and took the ferry to Spain and rode around Spain on a folding bike, if you can believe that.
How big were your wheels?
20-inch wheels.
Okay.
Bike Friday.
Yeah.
And so, right, because like they're a multimodal dream, right? Because you can. So we both have these folding bikes, and we started in our apartment in New York, got in the cab, checked the bikes on the plane, and then you rent this, this minuscule car in Rome, and the 2 bikes are in the boot, and we had those for the whole time we were there. So, I look like a circus bear when I'm on this bike. It's just, not that you should go to the circus or like torture bears, but I look like a circus bear on this little tiny folding bike. Yeah. But they're pretty capable, and it's a bike that you can do big climbs on and spend the whole day on, and so that's what I was riding in Spain.
Not to go down the detour of what it is like to ride one of those bikes. Does it feel like identical to riding a traditional bike? A little bit different, a little squirrely?
It's twitchy. It's fast. Like the front end is fast. They're really low trail, or at least many of them are really low trail, and so it feels like super sensitive. Yeah. When you got the bag in front, that slows it down a little bit. So people who tell you that the sensation is identical are exaggerating, but it's close enough. And you spent, we ride bikes, and
it's like riding a bike.
It's just being on a bike. And it's hilarious, like, rolling up into a town and you've got your bikepacking kit, but it's all attached to this tiny folding thing that can go in a suitcase.
That's so awesome. We think of I feel like the traditional sense of a cyclist thinks of, they're envious around travel day of a runner who just arrives with a pair of shoes, or a swimmer with a pair of goggles.
Right.
And a cyclist, Laura and I are in the midst of rejiggering our entire vehicular situation to put 2 adults, soon to be 2 kids. We have a son on the way.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Which, we're not the first people in the world to have 2 children, but how frequently we end up having to put 2 bike boxes into a car, and then you remove the entire middle row as a result of 2 kids' seats. It's amazing how big of a vehicle you need. It would be so awesome to just purely be riding foldable bikes. Okay, detour complete. Speaking of detours, so you went Italy to Spain.
Yeah, so we were in Puglia, as I mentioned, we were in Puglia in Italy, which Margaret and I had never been to, though we'd been to Italy lots of times. Like that's right in the heel of the boot, and the region's gorgeous. Wine, olive oil, old stone houses. So it's incredible. And then I departed from Rome on the ferry to get to Barcelona.
Nice. And how long were you in Spain?
3 weeks.
Holy smokes.
Doing a kind of U-shaped ride down to I was basically pursuing the sunshine.
I was going to say, you look sun-kissed, which I like. I mean, we had Rasputica this past weekend.
Yeah.
Well-known Vermont spring kickoff event, and people were telling me that I look sun-kissed, which admittedly I've been in California for the better part of a month. So
yeah. So speaking of which, after we saw each other, you came back here, but then you were out west again, right? You were going back and forth.
Right. Tucson was a relatively last-minute trip. Because you're right. It was February. We were in California for the Coast Ride, which is a terrific ride down the California coast in January. Happens every year amongst a group of friends. Came home to Vermont. Thought we were home for the long haul, but then we had the idea of chasing the sun. So we went to Tucson, which was awesome. Both of our former stomping grounds. You and I, Laura had never been. She had been once for a triathlon training camp, but we hadn't been back in a dozen or more years. So it's such a great reunion spot. A place you've spent so much time on a bike, and to see it over time and what's changed, what hasn't.
When that day when we crossed paths like unexpectedly, and you were riding down from Tucson to Patagonia, and it was so funny because like in the distance I saw you were coming up the climb, and you have this look of a serious cyclist, and you look like you meant business, and so you were coming up this climb, but as you got closer, like before I recognized you, I'm like, ooh, this dude's getting punished because you're like big rocks and you were on a track that maybe
you could just as easily been on a mountain bike.
Yeah, right. But then and I was like, Ted. So that ride was incredible, but you did a bunch of great rides down there.
Yeah, I mean that's a great example of going back to a place. I think of Middlebury often, to go all over the map, literally and figuratively. I got into cycling at Middlebury College down the road, and I only rode on the road. And so to go back now and ride all the gravel roads around there is so eye-opening and so much fun. No different than, amid my time at Middlebury, I went to Tucson for a semester and then extended period, another month or so. And we only ever rode on the road. I was a pure road racer at the time, so it wasn't like gravel is a thing. And on top of that, it was also sort of the heyday, there's so many, everything is sharp there and unforgiving. There's cactus, and it was definitely in a pre or early phase of sealant and tubeless tires. And so you're riding tubed mountain bikes, and it's like, well, yeah, what are you gonna do when you got a cactus? Like, you're so screwed. Yeah. Whereas now you as a result of technology, it's so cool to get off road, to go explore. Yeah. 15 years ago, last time I was in Tucson, it would never cross my mind to do that route from Tucson to Patagonia on the route that we overlapped.
Well, that area around Elephant Head, I think you were south of Elephant Head at that point, but anyway, the area around Elephant Head, we used to mountain bike there, right? I was a grad student in the 90s in Arizona, at the University of Arizona, and like we thought of those as mountain bike rides. Yeah. Right? That there was no doubt in our minds that that's what mountain bikes were for, and we would never dream of putting a drop bar bike on that.
Right.
But nowadays, here we are.
Yeah, it's the full circle of cycling. I reference it often. I love that mountain bike technology is coming to road riding and gravel riding. And by that, I typically mean better brakes and disc brakes. Yeah. Wider gear ratios, and wider tires. And maybe wider handlebars. I mean, it sort of brings you back to, what is the perfect bike? You're going to have a quiver of one. What is it? And it is this sort of hybrid mountain road, not to make the conversation about gravel, but yeah, it ends up landing sort of at this gravel-centric thing. Way back when. Yeah. Your entry into cycling was, I believe, your collegiate years. Yeah. And it was on a mountain bike, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So I got to Williams College in the fall of '87. Okay. and that was the first time I'd ever seen mountain bikes.
Yeah.
Right. So college students were starting to have mountain bikes at that point. We're probably at that point 5 years into commercially available production mountain bikes falling into the hands of perfectly ordinary people that you might hang out with outside of California. And so fall of 87 is the first time I see a mountain bike. I'd ridden a little bit of BMX as a kid, but not, don't get any image of like jumping jumps or being serious, but it's just,
But you're familiar with
bike.
the concept of what centrifugal force, I mean, the way a bike works.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so I'm like, this is interesting. Like, what is this? These bikes are like BMX tires on these 10 speeds, but they have I'm trying to just understand what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
And
Suspension?
No. This is pre that first RockShox and pre suspension stem.
Yeah.
And so the next year, like, it took me a year to like save up the $350 to like go to the local shop and get one of these things. I got a GT Tequesta.
Oh, nice. What color was it?
It was black with teal lettering and like a spider web kind of lattice work on it. Wish I still it's ridiculous.
Right?
I should still have that bike.
Yeah.
And so then we just rode in the hills and Williamstown, like Middlebury, or like many small towns in New England, it's super easy to just ride from your doorstep into the woods. And we were idiots, but that made it much more fun than almost any ride I do now, right? Which involves preparation and stressing out about whether I'm wearing the right thing and have the right preparation. But, we would like wrap these kerchiefs around our heads and put on our hiking boots and go into the woods on these bicycles.
Yeah.
And that's how I started. Yeah, that was my introduction to cycling.
How about athletics previously?
I went to a big urban high school in Miami, and even though I liked to be outside and maybe had a flirtation with like track type things as a young person, by the time I was in high school, it was just like one of those moronic things where it's just like you had the jocks and then you had the nerds. I'm on team nerd, and these two groups don't intersect. So it really was a kind of entry into both, not just bicycles, but also like being embodied, which is so important to me, to us now.
Yep. Where you end up at a prestigious liberal arts school in Northwest Massachusetts. Did you apply to many schools? How do you suppose you ended up at Williams?
Yeah, it's funny. So I'm a professor at Williams now, and so I talk to, generations of students. They just keep renewing. It's nice. Like everybody in my world is like between 19 and 22, right?
Yeah.
That's like that. Everybody, except the other professors. And so I talk to students now about their college search and their anxieties about university, and it just wasn't like that. Like I was so basically ill-informed and ignorant about what the world was that you would write like a postcard to a college and ask for their course catalog and their application materials, and 3 weeks later maybe they would have replied.
Yeah.
And so, right, there's no internet, there's no email, there's no, right?
Yep.
And so
Yep.
if you want to call somebody, you have to call directory assistance in the state or the area code where they are, and you have to
Right.
and so I applied to some big universities. I applied to Berkeley and University of Florida. I also applied to some small schools because some friends had done a college tour and reported that this area was, I had in my head like a Robert Frost poem. Like maybe I could go to school, that kind of place.
Yeah.
And so, how did you you in Middlebury? Like how did that?
Yeah, my question was stemmed from it. If you'd gone to the University of Miami, you probably wouldn't have found cycling in the capacity that it is in your life now. And maybe you would, maybe it wouldn't have. I would probably have cycling in my life. I largely applied to small liberal arts schools in New England, with some exceptions. And I got into cycling because I have a brother who's 3 years my senior. He went to a prep school in New Hampshire that had a cycling team. He took to it quickly and well, and I was more into team sports through high school. I played a heck of a lot of hockey, soccer, and tennis. And I went off to college and thought, okay, now my athletic career is over. I'll pursue academics. Middlebury's a school that it behooves you to study hard. And coincidentally, the University of Vermont, which was 45 minutes up the road from Middlebury, was hosting the Collegiate National Championships. My brother, who was at Colorado College as a student, came to that national championship, which finished over Appalachian Gap, which now is a regular training ride from where we sit here.
Right.
It's within training distance of Middlebury.
Right.
I watched the feed zone, which this really could have been the first ever bike race that I watched.
Oh, man.
I watched the feed zone. My parents are there. My grandmother's there. I helped my brother out in the feed zone. I remember him reprimanding me because you're supposed to go like this and hold the water bottle out. And I'm running alongside being like, "Do you want a Snickers bar? Do you want another bottle?" And I just remember him saying, "Just give me the damn bottle." I'm like, well, okay, I've had enough of this bike racing thing. I'm going back to campus. He wins the race. So over a short period of time, I realized I am probably the recipient of hand-me-downs. I probably share the same genes. I can take to this sport of cycling, and let's see where it takes me.
But that's pretty late, right? For somebody who's going to race pro in Europe, you get to the sport
right
like 5 years after a lot of the folks you raced against.
It's fascinating, especially now. I feel like the sport of cycling is under the microscope in that if you're not a pro by 21, it's like, what are you doing with your life?
Yeah.
I had a teammate my penultimate year when I was on liquid gas who at that point was a 19-year-old two-time world champion, Mate Mohoric, who's now winning.
Oh, right. He's
phenomenal cyclist.
Yeah.
Now he's an older statesman at probably 27 maybe. And I was like, Mate, I wasn't even riding a bike and you're a two-time world champion. Like you are going to exceed any expectation I might have had for this sport. I was anomalous in getting to the sport late and making to the world tour, and my whole career was I would call it a series of doors opening. I never had an expectation. When I first got into sport, I thought, okay, I would try this sport, and then as I do pretty well in the collegiate ranks and the amateur ranks, I thought, maybe I'd try to become a pro. And so senior year, when friends are applying to jobs, I basically applied to be a pro cyclist.
I think we decided that I saw you racing down on the Williams campus.
Yeah.
Like that was the span when I was coaching the Williams team, right?
That's right.
So I knew of you, and then as you went to Europe, then I was just like, oh, heck yeah.
Which was, I was good in the collegiate ranks. Sort of in that top 3 racers in the Northeast and do well at nationals, etc. But I was far from exemplary. So I think I also characterize my whole career as a heck of a lot of hard work and grit mixed with some talent, which also speaks to it's such a fun sport to analyze with, especially non-cycling fans, because they might say well, why don't you train harder, and maybe you could be a Tour de France team leader, and it's like no. You are born with X physiology, and this is going to fit into the cartridge of the pro peloton, if you can even make it that far. It's fascinating.
Do you think coming to it that much later than a lot of your peers, did that keep doors open for you? I think of you as super, during your career you were super imaginative on social media, and you were always, at least to me, much more accessible as a human being to the fans of the sport. And now, after coming back from Europe, now you're doing this other thing that's tremendous and that you're well known for, and your imagination just seems to me more expansive than that of a person who was channeled into something very early. So is that part of what's going on, that you came to it late?
I think you're spot on in that there are the unintended consequences of a decision at the time that pay dividends down the road that you don't even realize are at play.
Yeah.
So social media you know, I took to Twitter because that seemed like a fun thing to do, and
You should buy it.
I should. If only I had a little bit more cash. They were looking at my offer and didn't like it. Facebook, love it or hate it nowadays. I got on Facebook because it was designed for small liberal arts students in New England at the time.
Right.
And so it was like the way to hit on the girl in your Spanish class that you don't know. So yeah, I was early adopted to a lot of these things. I started a blog in 2006. I am tedking.blogspot.com in order to write one email and describe the previous week of what it was like racing, rather than writing 15 emails to family and friends to describe that experience. So nothing was intended then to right. I think I created a following in the world tour because I was trying to be transparent of what this funky lifestyle was like.
Yeah.
And now fast forward to now, it's like Laura is also an incredible athlete. We're sharing this experience of what it's like to have a family, often on the road at races. But when I met Laura in 2016, before we were married, before we had kids, obviously, I'm now in the gravel space. Like, gravel wasn't what it is now as it was then. So it's just this nonstop evolution, and it's sort of being ready to jump off on any opportunity that comes your way.
So I feel like you're in as good a position to think about this stuff as anyone in the universe. So do you think some people are worried that gravel is kind of headed toward road, sort of the values and ethos of road racing, values and an aesthetic that in your bones, having spent all those years in Europe road racing. Do you think that's right, that it's headed that way, or is it bending in that direction, but it's never gonna be the same? There's always gonna be like a distance between them. What do you think about that?
I think about it often. I certainly don't have a crystal ball that I know the answer to it. One thing that stands out to me at my first ever big national level gravel race, a race currently called Unbound, was purely the community. I had success at the race, but the fact that it's so much about everybody there, and I sort of cringe at the word community because it's used in every sentence of cycling nomenclature. Right. But there's no better word.
Yeah.
And it's the folks who are finishing at 11:30 on a Saturday night on Commercial Street in Emporia, and that's what floats the event. That's what is that is everything. That is the sport. That is the body of the sport of gravel. Whereas in road racing, and I'm a product of road racing, I love road racing. I want to see road racing exist and thrive. It's in such a hurting place now in America. I'm sort of throwing things at the wall here. Where I think the two diverge in a big way is it is that community. You might see a gravel event or hear about a gravel event, and because your buddy who rides once every 6 months has signed up and he says this is cool, and by the way there's a beer garden afterwards, and we're not there for the race, we're there for this ride. I think that and gravel in general is the first time that there can be this gravitational bringing together that you will never get with due respect to crit racing, with Grand Fondos, with road racing. There's something that's still very difficult and standoffish about those. That is my hope, right? I mean, it boggles my mind how serious gravel racing has gotten, and it only will continue in that direction for who knows how long. Mountain biking in a generation that precedes me has gone through that period, and now mountain biking is thriving and awesome, and so I don't know. So as someone who lives in it and has all these ideas here, there, and everywhere, what do you see? To ask you the identical question.
Yes.
And let me interrupt. Sorry.
Yeah.
My perspective that I've just answered for the previous 5 minutes is gravel with a number on your handlebars. And gravel, of course,
Yeah.
is so much bigger than that.
Right.
And so, that was, I'm not saying that gravel with a number on your handlebars is the only thing of gravel. There's so much more than that.
Yeah, I like the way of putting it, with the number on the handlebars. I get that. I mean, look, I'm a huge fan of bike racing, right? So Greg LeMond, the Indurain era, the Lance era, right? So all like I'm a huge fan of bike racing. And my own relationship to racing bikes is that I was like a super mediocre, Cat 3 pack plotter. And so I loved it. I did it. It was an important part of my life when I was doing it. But I also have this other part, like this maybe bigger part of my bicycling life, having to do with being in a place, often in a faraway place, being self-sufficient, right? So with your bag strapped to your bike, improvising, following an old map or following the contour of the land, or being in a place that embeds you in the history and the culture and the geography of the place, like that's a huge part of my life too. And those seem to me pretty separate. They both involve bicycles, but they seem to me pretty separate. And of course there's a massive community of people who race, in the kind of bikepacking context. I think of my good friend Lael Wilcox, who is about as good at that as one can be. And so, and I admire that intersection, but that intersection's not really at the front of my mind. So I'm always like, I watch and consume bike racing and love it, and then there's this other thing that I do. And in the context of that other thing, I don't have it quite sorted out in my head entirely, but it seems to me that what happened was, like, when bikepacking started to be a thing that people talked about, it's existed forever, right, since there are bikes. Mm-hmm. but it started to be a thing that people talked about in 2005, 2010-ish. The word is from the 70s, right? National Geographic. Yeah, the word bikepacking from the 70s, National Geographic. And so people started talking about it in 2010. My good friend Logan Watts started bikepacking.com under its previous name around that time.
That was probably a really good website name to buy, URL to buy.
Yeah, it's funny. There's a funny story about that where our other buddy Neil had that URL first, that domain name first, and then Logan and Neil got together and have done this great thing. And so when people started to talk about bikepacking as a thing, it was a mountain bike thing, right?
Okay.
It was like you were mountain biking. You were bikepacking on your hardtail or your dual suspension bicycle with a backpack on.
Yeah.
And that's what it was for like 6 going into 8 years. And then here's my theory. I think what happened was that mountain bikes got more like aggro and sendy, right? They the front ends got slacker, the seat tube angles got steeper. Mm-hmm. And those bikes started to seem less fun to just go on a dirt tour on. Yep. Like if you were going to do the VTXL, you probably wouldn't take your very slacked out mountain bike.
Right.
And so, dude, did you? Sorry. Have you picked up on the fact that you're 2 years almost to the day since you finished the VTXL?
No.
It was like May 1st or May 2nd that you finished it, right?
No, June.
Was it June?
I think it would. I think June, because I was trying to. That was when I created DIY gravel, and it was trying to overlap.
We have a month to go.
Well, so yeah, you're down to. We're at 47 months.
47 months. Okay. Right.
That sounds 2 years doesn't sound like a long time. 47 months sounds like a very long time.
Yeah, that does sound.
Wait, that's 4 years. Sorry, 23 months.
23 months. 23 months.
Okay.
All right. So yeah. Sorry. So my story's too long, but I guess what I was sneaking up on is this idea that once mountain bikes no longer seemed the right tool to go bikepacking on.
Yeah.
Then people started doing that stuff on gravel bikes.
Right.
And probably if you pick the modal demographic of bikepacking.com, it's probably somebody who rides a drop bar bike with 50 mil tires. Mm-hmm. rather than what it started for, which is mountain bikes. Okay, so what does all that say? To me, what that says is that there's this big community of gravel riders, and you were alluding to this earlier, or this big community of gravel riders who are about the exploration, to invoke another cliche, or about being on a kind of trip with their friends in a landscape, learning about a place, being with each other, and that community, that sense of community, seems to me central to the aesthetic of fat tire bikes with drop bars that you and I ride. In common in a certain way, but also with important divergences.
Mm-hmm. Which makes me think of 700 different things. Not least of which, talking purely about the hardware. We were talking about how when I was at Middlebury, I wouldn't ride the gravel roads because my road bike with 21 or 23 mil tires would immediately puncture and then you're up a creek. And that makes me think of bike packing. You said when it was originally designed, it was a lot of folks who were on mountain bikes and bike packing on mountain bikes. How much bike packing was taking place on road bikes, would you say? Or was it?
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, then it becomes kind of annoyingly semantical. Like, what do we mean by bike packing? Right. So it's like I loved the way you're putting it. Like gravel riding with a number on the front. That sort of defines a certain kind of activity. To me, bike packing is a kind of minimalism with respect to the gear. So that kind of encourages you to put soft bags on your bike rather than 4 panniers or 2 panniers. Though I'm perfectly open to the idea that somebody's going to bike. I mean, I was just bike packing on a folding bike, so of course I'm open to the idea that people bike pack with 4 Ortlieb panniers. That's a great way to tour. But so for me, bike packing is a certain kind of minimalism, a certain kind of aesthetic to be on dirt rather than tarmac. And doing that on a road bike is tricky for just the reasons you're saying, right? It's just like, we all ride our road bikes on dirt, but it's not that fun.
Right. And we do now with greater capability than we do a decade or 2 ago. Whereas the non-starter, now you do it for a 100-yard bike trail section.
Right.
And then you're back on the pavement, and that's a much more comfortable ride. You're right about the semantics of it all. Do you consider credit card camping bike packing?
Before I answer, let me just say I've done a ton of credit card trips. This is how Margaret and I, we did this awesome trip starting from home in Pownell. We did this triangle from Pownell to Grafton, stayed at the Grafton Inn. Nice. And then crossed over to Dorset, stayed at the Dorset Inn, and then rode back home. Yeah. So 2 nights. Basically Margaret she just had her little black dress and a puffy coat and a saddlebag, and we had our credit card, and it was one of the best. Of course it's with my wife, so of course it was awesome. So and we were drinking wine and having a great dinner every night. So that was a great trip. So that's definitely a kind of trip that I'm enthusiastic about. Yeah. Bike packing, I guess to me, again, bike packing is first a kind of aesthetic commitment, where the aesthetic has to do with, or the values have to do with self-sufficiency, a kind of quiet on quiet roads, or the kind of quietude of soul that you get on quiet roads. Maybe seeing something new and being embedded in a place, trying to internalize some of the history and the story of that place. Like, those are the things that, for me, define bike packing. People find that on, if people are going to seek that on, like, e-bikes going from inn to inn in Switzerland, sounds great to me. Yeah. Like, that's not my jam, but that seems like bike packing to me.
Yep. Yeah, I tend to agree. I understand a fondness for a traditional method, but that's often I get questions all the time, and I am a total novice bike packer. I get questions all the time. How do I even start? And I often will tell people, do a credit card trip.
Yeah, for sure.
Because you have you can have a warm shower and a bed. It's intimidating to even think of the hardware you have to bring from a tent to a whatever the heck to be completely self-sufficient, to get out the door and go. There's something so cool about a point to point. And even if you're going from your home to a hotel overnight and then back home the next day, that's an awesome first hurdle.
Yeah.
And you'll quickly begin to try to challenge yourself in new and different ways. I'm going to shut off the background emails so we stop getting pinging.
Is that appealing at all to you? Like bike packing, so like competitive bike packing, ride the Great Divide?
I would love to do the Great Divide. That's a sentence, and now I'll move on to another sentence. You created VTXL at my questioning, does this route exist? No, it doesn't, but I think I can craft something up. And now it's super cool to see how many people are doing it quickly or slowly, and I get a lot of questions about it. I'm sure you do too.
Yeah, it's so cool.
And what I tell people, I'm like, yeah, I did it as quickly as possible. You will have so much fun if you do it at a minimum 4 days.
I did it 4 days.
Yeah,
right?
and
that's what.
And that's still a huge challenge.
Yeah.
And you can explore, and you can detour, and you can find swimming holes and creamies and everything that makes Vermont phenomenal. That would be my idea of how to do it again. Doing it in the reverse direction.
Yeah.
So my bike packing experience exists in the following capacity. I wouldn't even consider that. Well, that's a long 1 day point to point. I did the James Bay descent, which was the James Bay of Canada in the winter.
Dude, way to jump in both feet into the deepest end. Like, that's insane.
Yes, with people holding my hands, like people who are very experienced at keeping oneself alive when it is negative 40 degrees outside of your parka. And that was cool, and I had full faith that we would come back because 2 of the 3 people with whom I traveled have children and spouses. All of them have spouses, and I was at that point married and with a child on the way, so I was like, guys, I literally need to come home.
I definitely need to get home.
And yeah, my 2 fears were the temperature, negative 40 degrees, northern Canada, February, and polar bears. And the risk of polar bears was great on the first day because we were near a body of water, and then after that we were inland a little bit. And so once we got through the first day and didn't see any polar bears, we were golden. And Buck, awesome. Are very Canadian. Everybody was Canadian except myself, but Buck has the big beard, and Buck is the man. He also carried the shotgun naturally, and he was adamant that we'd survive the bears. That was jumping both feet in. That was wild. The Arkansas High Country is a race that fit well in a pandemic. I did that October 2020. Things seem to be coming a little bit normal. Obviously, in hindsight, things were not normal in 2020 by any stretch of the imagination. But there was something neat about what you alluded to in bikepacking in the first place. Being self-sufficient and not relying on hotels and being indoors and being in general stores but still aspects of that make bikepacking so cool in that rural setting of Northwest Arkansas, being able to see these glimpses and see humanity and that had been so closed off for so long.
Yeah. And that one you were like what, sleeping in a bivy bag? And
I had a bivy. I did sleep in a hotel one night. I slept in a community center, which is just like an open door town hall.
Come in, yeah.
I camped one night, and that was wild. I distance and time make the heart grow fonder, and so I consider, that was kind of fun. Well, I want to go back, and I still have the FKT. I came within spitting distance of losing it this past year, I don't know if you followed it. It was fascinating. This guy from Connecticut was there. I went to bed. You're watching the dot. We're dot watching all throughout the week, and he had, I want to say, 30 miles to go, and I went to bed knowing that I was going to wake up the next day that with him completing it, and a storm came through, and he stopped with 30 miles to go and did not get the FKT. So I know he's all the hungrier to go back.
Yeah.
And that set off the question often, like, okay, if he had taken it, would I go back? And yeah, I have like the romanticized view of, that'd be fun to go back. Mm-hmm. But I lost feeling in my fingers and toes for months.
Oh no.
Those are the things that happen when you're racing, as opposed to, I'd like to just go back and ride it.
Yeah.
So it's a very long-winded way of saying I'm a novice at bikepacking. I'm curious, big picture question being old versus new, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of routes. Mm-hmm. Like, do you want to ride a new route that you've never done and explore a new area, or do you have your favorites that you love going back to? I think of it, I think about that concept frequently in cycling, old versus new. Like, what the traditionalism in cycling. I love new technology. I love disc brakes. I love sealant and fat tires and big gear ratios and the comfort of bikes, but there's still something cool and romanticized about so many things that are old school in cycling.
Yeah. I love this because it, like, old versus new is like so like provocatively massive, right? So
intentionally.
Yeah. So good because I think probably a lot of my friends don't quite see it this. A lot of people I do trips with, Logan and Jess and Virginia. A lot of people I do trips with appreciate the new technology and are eager to embrace anything that will be a means to a successful ride. But my sense of them, I'll hear about it if I'm wrong about this, but my sense of them is that they tend not to think in sort of historico-aesthetic terms. Mm-hmm. So they're not trying to, like, maybe Ronnie Romance is like this, Ultra Romance. Yeah. So my good friend Ronnie, maybe he's like this, but people I hang out with tend not to think in terms of what am I doing now that harkens back to the way it was done 30 years ago or 110 years ago or 20 years ago. And, being concerned about that can maybe sort of shade off into like some weird fetishizing of the past or like weird fashion or like making it a cosplay kind of thing. But I hope it's not that for me. Like I still want to know, like, how did people present themselves in the 1890s when they were doing around the world dirt bicycle trip? Or like the shape of the bicycle that Eddie Merckx was riding, right? Not quite the shape that pros are riding now. Pros are riding much lower front ends, and the bikes look different from the early 70s to now. Like, take some of those early 70s bikes, like that imagery of the classic era of road riding, and what does that tell us about design, about personal presentation, about fashion? And so, a lot of the bikepacking trips I go on, I'm in roadie kit, maybe a merino jersey instead of a plastic one. But at any rate, I'm in roadie kit, and the reason I am is because I'm traveling in a sort of sporty culture, like I'm in Slovenia or I'm in Italy, and there's a kind of referencing to the beauty of the sporting history in the way you present yourself, and people read you as acknowledging that history. So for me, there always needs to be a dialogue between like how you do it now and how it was done in the past, out of reverence, out of admiration, out of a sense of continuity. So I love the old versus new contrast because it like lets us think about the history of what we do. I want to know what you think about this, but let me just say that as far as routes, I always want to do new routes. Like I just like there are places and people and stories to hear that I want. Like I don't have that many more years on this earth. I'm twice as old as you, and so well, maybe not twice, but anyway, close. But you know, I want to see the things that I haven't seen yet. So I always want to do the new thing in that respect.
I could not agree more. I certainly have my favorite rides around here. I love coming home. There's something that I think I finish my podcast by often saying, "What is your favorite place to ride a bike?" And I'd say more often than not, people will say their home, and that's because it's probably the areas they know and the areas they have spent a lot of time and so on and so forth. But I'm with you. Bigger than that, outside of right here, I would love to go explore new places, and I'm certainly lucky to have ridden in a lot of really cool spots. But there's so many more to go and see and do. By no means do I want to. The preface to this is we're not going to politicize this conversation. You've mentioned you're good friends with Lael. Lael has been a guest on my podcast. What she is doing on the bike is so freaking cool and expanding horizons for girls in Alaska who never would consider riding a bike, and certainly stomping plenty of men in the competitions that she is doing. She recently set a documented, which is to say her trip was documented, FKT on the Arizona Trail, which has been politicized. I mean, people love it or hate it, seemingly from social media, they largely love it. I can empathize with what people are saying about there is an emotional boost you get by seeing like anything. Like when you are hanging on by a ragged thread and your emotions are torn and your legs are torn and you are just at the end of your wits in the midst of a bikepacking trip, I can see why that would be an emotional boost to see a loved one, to who knows what, high five or just know that they're there. And I think and this is my experience thinking of from the Arkansas high country. My personal takeaway, and it is merely my opinion, is that it errs towards newer rather than old when I go ask the question of new versus old. It's with better technology, like we're riding the best bikes now with better technology, again, tires, brakes, gearing, suspension, whatever the heck, it's going to make you faster now than they would in a previous era. No different than you can spot track and you can document and these things that have changed the sport in little details, but not necessarily changed the what we're hearkening at in the bigger picture of like setting an FKT. What is the fastest time? Yeah. Do you have thoughts on? So in a certain way, the controversy is the controversy about Lael is heartbreaking because it's sort of like it's this immediate and overwhelming distraction from having a much more positive conversation about achievement, accomplishment, about drawing people in and drawing attention to something that we care about, right? So that, to me, that's the headline story, and then sure, maybe when you start turning the pages, you get to page 3, you get to the controversy, but that's not how the world is, right? The world leads with the controversy. Yeah. And I wrote about this on my blog a few days after Lael finished, and basically came out super positively about the FKT. Took a lot of shit for having written. I mean, it took a lot of very positive. I got a lot of positive feedback, but I took a lot of crap too for it for what I had to say. It was interesting because a lot of people wanted to kind of wag their finger and say, "Well, you're not an ultra endurance racer, so you can't actually say here." Seems a little condescending to me, but maybe. But anyway, but the position that I took on it, or at least my position now, I want to see what Payson has to say about this. Like Payson's going to write about this. Yeah, right? I think so.
But so anyway, my take on it now is that for me as a fan of racing in lots of different forms, from the Williams students in the B field at the collegiate crit to the Tour of Italy, right, to the Giro. So racing in all those forms, I'm a fan of it. Mm-hmm. As a fan, what I want to know is who has pushed their work ethic and their talent and their born gifts. Who has pushed those to the absolute limit to have achieved this glorious thing, right? It's an exaltation of human achievement for me when I watch bike racing. And so, like, if I want to know who has the FKT of something, I want to know who did it fastest, right? Without cheating. And then, of course, then we have to interrogate our notions of what cheating is, right? If you get on a train, you're cheating. If you took EPO, you're cheating. If you whatever, right? And so, but my view is that Rue being there wasn't cheating. Mm-hmm. My view is that having folks taking some photos of you along the trip wasn't cheating. That's my view about it. As a fan, I want to know who has the FKT in that sense. Mm-hmm. If there's another sense, who has the FKT in this very kind of pure version, the kind of almost dirtbag version. Mm-hmm. Dirtbag, I say respectfully, because that's how I travel. Yeah. If that's another thing, great. Uh-huh. I'm actually interested in this other concept, but I acknowledge that that's a concept.
Overall, totally agree. Wholeheartedly, I agree. As a fan of cycling racing, it's nice to I say we live in the golden age of consuming cycling media. It's like, I turn on my phone and I can watch 3 different World Tour races on any given weekend. Yeah. That's really cool. I can read about it online. You can watch, it's neat how teams now have their own individual media companies that are creating YouTube videos and social media and so on and so forth. There's a overabundance of media. Yeah. In the World Tour, especially, but were it not for folks creating this kind of media, it's really hard to consume it and be a fan of it. I think it ends up being very biased were it not for a third party observing and creating the content that we can watch the race or consume it in some way, generally post facto, because otherwise it's going to be, if you had set the FKT and there's nobody observing it, then the only way to know what had happened is you afterwards writing something down and putting it out there and explaining what has happened. It's just strange, gosh darn it. It's like, why can't we all get along? But the age in which we live. So how about...
Can I ask you something about that?
Please.
Yeah, so I agree. We live in the golden age of watching bike racing and learning about this thing that is, a niche within a niche in a niche. But we get to be a community and be in communication with one another about it. I worry though. Like I worry in my so for bikepacking.com, I've contributed a bunch of routes that are popular on that site. So the route in Slovenia, the VTXL that we worked on together, which is hugely popular. I did the route in Kyrgyzstan that was then adapted to the Silk Road mountain race, right? Yeah. So people who raced the Silk Road mountain race in the first year and part of the second year were racing on my course, right? My course, I had intended that to be like a trip for a team of 4, going from small community to small community in a certain way. Never envisioned it as a race, but once it's out in the world, it's not in my hands anymore in a certain way. And that's what I want to ask you about. Like, you and I, well, I'm making assumptions about you, but I certainly participate in the accumulation of data for heat maps on the phone apps that I use. I post the rides that I do. Almost every ride I do gets posted.
Yep.
I contribute and create routes for people to. I want for me it's community, and for me it's a chance to break open this thing that I really resented as a young person, which was that people were keeping secrets about what was fun. Yeah. Like I couldn't break into the community because I was an outsider for whatever reason, and people just shared it with their friends, and I never got to participate. I don't want to be that guy. Like I want to share this stuff because I think it's cool, and I think other people are going to think it's cool too.
Yeah.
But our era of so much shareability makes it so that places can be overloved. They can, maybe some of these communities, maybe there might be towns in Vermont. For all you and I know, there are towns in Vermont on the VTXL where, in the height of the season, right in the middle of July, there are like 15 bikepackers that come through, and they're like,
right?
Look
at this traffic.
What's going on here? And so, what do you think about that? Like sharing versus, keeping the community open, but also wanting to respect that the land needs our stewardship, communities need our respect and stewardship. What do we do?
Beats me. It reminds me on the acute level, doing the Northeast Kingdom. That's a poor example, but I'm thinking of routes and rides that depend on private landowners, and maybe Vermont 50, for example, is a good example because one day a year, a bunch of landowners open up their property and allow people to ride it and race it. Where 364 days the rest of the year, they're not. It's private land. I mean, as we talked about a half hour ago, so much of my career has unfolded the way it has as a result of social media and being transparent about what I'm doing and where I'm doing it and how I'm doing it. We live in such a strange public age that, as the father of a 2-year-old, it worries me where it's going. What I like about cycling social media, outside of the forums that hang so much crap on all of this, the Lail controversy, is by and large it seems positive, and maybe those are good examples of where we can still see humanity like niggling at the problem, and that's where we're humanity in the first place, rather than cyclists. But the forums, the comment sections seem to be upbeat. They seem to be positive.
Yeah,
I like that. I rely on that. That makes me happy, even if it's the one negative comment out of 1,000 positive ones. Exactly. But yeah, as I said, I don't know. It's a strange time. It reminds me of a question. Okay, UCI is threatening to come into gravel. The lifetime series is controversial in gravel, as gravel just continues to get more serious. And what I've often tried to take a step back and talk amongst my contemporaries and say, okay, well, rather than saying gravel is going the wrong direction, getting too serious, why can't we just look at what works in gravel now and heighten the positive parts and keep what works well and just sort of shed what does not work well? That it's a cute thought. Putting that to practice is a lot easier said than done, because it's almost like cycling is gravel cycling, and cycling in general is just momentum, and it's going to change in whatever way it's going to change over time. So it almost just becomes this sort of live in the moment. Like you feel like a drop in the bucket. What can I actually? Where can I impart change?
Yeah. But I like what you're saying about keying into the goodness of people, and I agree. I think a lot of the conversation in the space that we're talking about is positive conversation, like keying into the goodness of people and giving them a kind of incentive to maximize the positive aspect. Like what that means for me is I've kind of changed the way I write up the routes that I post on my blog or on bikepacking.com. Like I used to give everybody all the goods.
Yeah.
And I thought my thinking then was I'm gonna make it possible for somebody to like just take this ride off the web and do the whole thing and have a great time. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was my duty to the sense of community and to acknowledgement of sharing. I don't do it that way anymore. I like leave a lot of stuff out.
Yeah.
And I leave so much out now that, some people are like, what the hell? You've left all this stuff out. How am I supposed to do this ride? Where do I camp? Where do I get food? What's the weather going to be like? What kind of bike should I be on? Like, do I need to bring right? And so I leave so much out that people now call me out on it. But like, I want there to be so much left out that somebody has to like get invested in it and figure out some portion of it themselves, which the hope is that once they do, then they're kind of cultivating the positive and expressing the goodness of their nature, because now they've put in the work to like be in a place and to understand, what this experience means. Like how that translates into something like gravel racing, like I'm not sure, but it feels like there should be an opportunity there to have people invested in it to like keep it good.
Man, that's. I've never poured into a route or a ride as much as I did before Arkansas High Country, because it's the first multi-day. It had nothing to do with getting a fast result. It was how am I going to survive when it's cold and I don't have friends holding my hand. And that was the first time that I really felt like a bike packer, and poring over gazetteers and looking at topographical maps and so on and so forth. What I loved about it was I could also speak with other friends who had far more experience bikepacking than I, and they were very eager to share.
Yeah.
And that was very cool. I don't know, and I feel like now, translating it to gravel, it's becoming so hyper competitive. I think people are a bit more apprehensive to share their beta.
Yeah.
And maybe that's amongst racers, and because in that very sharp part of the race, we are talking about marginal gains now. Whereas if people who are new to the sport, when they reach out, by all means, I think a lot of my contemporaries are sharing all of that years and years and years of beta. So beats me.
Is the way you ride bikes now, like, is there, if you had, if not to put you on the spot, but if you had to like say what you love, what you value, what source of meaning you get from the way you ride bikes now versus the way you rode bikes 15 years ago, like what is that difference? What is it now for you?
I can guarantee that 15 years ago I would not have said it's about the community. With changing time in life and life circumstances, and now being a father and being a husband, I love nothing more than casual family rides. Or we rode yesterday literally 2 miles downhill to the Richmond Mountain Trails fundraising thing at the bar with Hazel on my handlebars, and then rode back. So, a 4 mile ride. Sure. I mean, that never would have entered my it is not a bike ride I ever would have done 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I think the listener, the viewer, sees that, I've had a bike racing perspective my life, throughout my cycling career. You are a tenured professor of philosophy. How much of the world do you see from that perspective, intentionally or unintentionally?
I might not be in the best position to talk about the unintentionally part, because there might be like an echo of it all the time. You might have to ask Margaret what the real story is. But look, I love what I do. I love my life. I love that I get to, my job is to, I have to pinch myself, right? My job is to sit in a small room with 12 20-year-olds to talk about topics that are meaningful to me and meaningful to them in the most abstract, expansive way. Like that's what I do for a living. So I love that. But I don't want that to be the entirety of it. I want, I want to be with place and people in the world, and bikes has been my avenue for getting out of the world of the academy and philosophy. So, people who don't know me that well are like, were you doing philosophy when you were on that bike trip? I'm like, no, hell no. No, I was actually working very hard to not do philosophy then, because I was trying to get tired enough at high enough altitude and hungry enough so as to break my consciousness so that I wasn't thinking thoughts.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to do. Mm-hmm. And so my hope for myself is that that's not the entirety of the, and you were, I know you're being only half serious, because of course, cycling's a big part of your world. But look, for the short time I've known you, I feel like you think massively outside of cycling type thoughts about what's good, about what's important, about how to live a life, right? That's why people have been interested in your career, because you're not just, turning the pedals.